While we were in Clinton last summer, we asked one of the farmers if he knew anyone in the area who was an eccentric, somebody who everybody knew who was a little bit strange or outside of the community. And he said that the only person that he could think of was a man named Charlie Wilson.
Well, I can tell you one thing about Charlie Wilson. He's dead.
So we went around and we asked different people what they could remember about Charlie.
Charlie had 2 shacks that he lived in, one for the summer and one for the winter. He had a bed and a wood stove and a table, and then he had some boxes for his books and his groceries.
Mr. J.E. Little, South Street, Godrich. Hello, Ern. I received the parcel you sent last Christmas.
He had what I guess you'd call a tick on the side of his face. And he used to rub away at it and work like that, so it was very difficult to understand what he was saying.
You could always tell one of Charlie's tools. He'd go out and find the discarded head of a shovel or an adze. And if it didn't have a handle, he'd go out in the bush and he'd cut down a limb, and then he'd carve it down until it fit. Then he'd put them together with, you know, bits of wire and nails. They looked funny, but they worked.
He was a lonely man. Spent a lot of time just by himself. But he used to come over to our house every Thursday night, exactly at 6 o'clock for supper. And then he'd watch Bonanza. I was one of the few people that ever saw the inside of his shack.
Dante's Divine Comedy contains some interesting historical notes, such as that purgatory was introduced into the papal form of religion in the 6th century by Pope Gregory.
I can tell you exactly what Charlie looked like. He had a long, lean face that looked as though it was hewn out of white elm. He was very pale. He had a square jaw, and his chin stuck out just a little bit.
Charlie, now, he was a caution. I remember once he started in telling me a story about this,
He was a well-educated man. He was one of the best educated people that I ever knew, and he was self-educated.
That's Brassica oleracea. You'd call it wild cabbage. You can tell by the waxy texture of the leaves. It's a young plant. Some of them grow as high as 1.5 feet or 2 feet.
Yeah, well, Charlie had a bit of land, and he had a pension. But most of the time he did odd jobs. Now, if you hired Charlie for an odd job, he'd be by at 9 o'clock in the morning, want to know what's to be done, and he'd start into doing it. Then at 12 noon, he'd disappear, and he'd be gone to 1 o'clock. Then he'd be back, and he'd work until the job was done or until 5 o'clock. But I tell you, don't get Charlie talking, because if you got him talking, you wouldn't get a thing done.
In the middle of winter, he used to walk the mile or so up to our place, and when he'd get inside, he'd sit, almost as if he was in a trance. And then he'd start working away at his face for a run. The kids were kind of repulsed by that.
My tick Dally-Roo bothers me so much sometimes that I can't get to sleep. And I often wish I could go down to the Maitland and chop a hole in the ice and jump in. But with my luck, the axe handle would probably break.
I can remember when old Bert Lobb went to visit Charlie in the hospital. Now, Charlie had cancer, and he showed Bert his open sore. Well, Bert was so mad at those doctors for keeping him alive and in pain, he nearly took the roof off of that hospital.
It was odd. and he kept apart. But he's in heaven.
Thanking you for your kindness, I remain your friend, Charlie Wilson. Address J. Chas Wilson, RR2, Clinton, Ontario.
The problem in this, in the improvisational form of documentary theater, that you don't get deep enough. It seems very shallow, because you haven't had very much time. I said to you before, talk about this, you know, we're kind of ingrained with the idea of accepting what a professional writer has to give you. What he gives you is, you believe anyway, a result of study and insight and so on. And as soon as we get up and try to improvise, it just seems that we're just scratching the surface. And the only way I think that he can give that it can be a kind of an in-depth thing is through the contrasts, the scene following scene following scene, the total view of the thing. I don't know, but I just worry that it's a very shallow picture of the lives of these people, because we butt in for 6 weeks and come in here for 5 hours a day and work these things out and say, here's a character and there's a scene and here's a danger and these are women on the farm and these are men on the farm and these are kids on the farm and this is their social life and so on. We don't really know that, and we think just from what they say at the moment. So maybe as a result of the whole show, it'd be nice to think somehow that it's doing justice to them, that their lives are there. I don't know.
It wasn't until about 10 days before the opening that I began to become aware of the talent involved, that they were becoming concerned about the reaction of the people who were being portrayed. They seemed just a little frightened of their ability to portray people's mannerisms, and suddenly it occurred to me that these people are afraid of what they can do.
They did it in the barn over at the bird place, and of course, to begin with, they had no idea how many people they were going to have. They were ready, I believe, for about 50 to 75, and I'm sure they had 200. And, of course, everybody was so enthusiastic. They had no idea what they were going to see. And so many of them people had met the actors and had talked with them and knew they were doing something, but they didn't know just what. And to see it all just kind of come together was, well, you can't really describe it, because none of us had ever seen anything done like that. I guess it would be a little different for people who are used to that, but it was really terrific, and the response was fantastic. It really, you know, made the actors a little hyper, too, I think. In the second act, they were really kind of flying.
When I first did the scene with the wedding album, Mrs. Lobb, old Mrs. Lobb, was sitting over on the side of the audience was out front like that, and I was sitting in about the middle, fairly close to the audience because there was posts in the way. So she was sitting quite on an angle from me. I didn't have to worry about her too much. But her husband was sitting about 1 foot from me, and he's a very shy, quiet, retired man, but he has a wonderful sense of humor. And he's sitting there, and he was very reserved. He sat there like this, and he looked down, and he just couldn't believe it. And every time he'd sort of look up at me, he'd laugh, and he'd look down again, he'd look over at his wife. And it was so, I was just terrified. It was so funny. And her son was sitting in the audience, and he just opened right up, and he was roaring with laughter and everything, and it was really funny.
Bruce saw Diane waiting on tables, and when she brought him coffee, spilled it over his knee. Oh, how he burned for her until one day he bought a wedding ring for her and stole her away. Then it started growing, that old log tree. Michael, Christopher, Jack, a bundle of 3. They're learning their Bible and they know God's way. will lead them to another family someday. Mobs of lobs, lob-in-laws, ready on the job, lobs all along the Maitland and the 16th line. If you go out driving there any time, look on out your window, you too will see that ever-spreading farming lob dynasty. Dynasty.
You see, the thing about a farmer and his tractor is that he's got to spend so much time on it. If I had $1 for every hour I spent on this thing, I wouldn't have to be on this thing. But it's like my friend old Bill Lobb said, sometimes a man gets to taking better care of his tractor than he does his wife. Well, you know, depending on what you're cropping, you might have to go over the same area, the same field, 5, 6, or 7 times in one season. And that can get pretty boring. But you can't let the boredom get to you. No, you gotta be awake, you gotta be alert, you gotta be watching. Say you're scuffling beans. Well, you gotta be looking behind you. See you're not tearing out those rows of beans that you're planting. Or say you're disking. Well, you gotta watch. You're not piling up the earth between those discs and slowing you down. And then there's always a bit of danger involved. I don't know anybody on this line hasn't turned his tractor a comfort nail to it one time or another. Now, I've got a bucker of a hill right on the other side of my place. There isn't a time I go up where I think, well, this could be it. It's loose ground, it's a heavy tractor, she'll just slide right out, come crashing. You can't think about that. It's all part of being a farmer. It's all part of being a tractor. I've done several shows since with Paul, but, well, we do come back to do the show because it's popular, but I also find that I keep coming back here, and it's even gone beyond the show now. We've become friends with these people, and if this show died tomorrow, I'd still come back to see Jack Tebbett and Bill Lobb, and Don and Allison, and when we do come back here, the show has become a secondary thing. We've come to see them, and they've come to see us. I've never been in a situation where that's ever happened with a show before, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again, where you do a piece of work like this that you really like, and out of it develops a whole circle of friends, a whole community that you feel in some ways that you really belong to. Not as much, but almost as much as some of the people that live here.
We found all these folks coming into our homes.
And it's even gone beyond the show now. We've become friends with these people. And if this show died tomorrow, I'd still come back to see Jack Tebbett and Bill Lobb, and Don and Allison. And when we do come back here, the show has become a secondary thing. We've come to see them, and they've come to see us. I've never been in a situation where that's ever happened with a show before. And I don't know if it'll ever happen again, where you do a piece of work like this that you really like, and out of it develops a whole circle of friends, a whole community that you feel in some ways that you really belong to. Not as much, but almost as much as some of the people that live here.
We found all these folks coming into our homes. We're always very courteous and gracious, and they're very welcome at any time. And we enjoyed the show they put on, even if it was embarrassing for us at times. But if it has given others pleasure, it has been worth it.